2 Bellators and a UFC in one weekend? Surely that'll be fun. Oh, and that's a bad miss. No, that was absolutely terrible. There was some redeeming stuff, but I say redeeming, there was some good stuff, but it didn't redeem an entire weekend of just shit and bizarre stuff and bad finishes and no contests and injuries. Just one of the weirdest weekends I can recall covering this sport. So if you're hoping for a big technical breakdown of stuff, we'll do some technical ins and outs, but mainly it's going to be me moaning about how straight up fucking weird the weekend was. From a popped ghoulie to a blown out knee to Paul Daly wrestling clinic. Just what was going on? But if you're here, you've probably already experienced all of that. You've probably caught up. If you're anything like me, you've begrudgingly caught up. The worst part is when you're catching up on an event and everyone's telling you that it's shit and you're like, well, I've got to watch it so that I can actually know why it's shit, even though I know it's going to be shit. Which is the downside of living in Europe and covering an American sport. But God forbid I be an Alucard fan. That's Dracula backwards, if you don't know. So I watched all of it, and it was, I watched most of it, and it was really, really bad. There's not even a lot of news this week. So let's jump into the news first. A sexy star is moving to MMA. She is a pro wrestler who is famously a piece of shit. I think it was Rosemary. She had an armbar, or what they call a cross arm breaker. Cross arm breaker in Japanese pro wrestling, or puroresu. And she cranked it on anyway. In a worked match, she decided to shoot on this lass. So yeah, no, people don't like her. But she's like 38 years old. She boxed for a while, but against absolute scrubs. So she's probably not going to have much of a career. It's just like a desperate attempt to make use of waning star power when probably no one in the wrestling industry wants to work with her anymore. Bit of good news, John Lineker versus Corey Sandhagen has been rebooked for UFC Miami. More boys in their banana hammocks banging on the beach. It's what we love. April 27th. That's a great fight. You got a nice varied striker against a guy with an iron chin and the heaviest hands in the division. And a wicked guillotine. He's got stumpy ass little arms, but he seems to still manage to guillotine anyone who shoots on him. And then the bad news, that Brandon Moreno and Dustin Ortiz were both separately cut this week. Two flyweights, I think both coming off losses. Allegedly, the way that this is working is that the UFC has to offer a fight to anyone who's on a win and still under contract. But if you lose even to a top flyweight, you can just pack up your things and move on. Which sort of supports my theory that they're going to do Cejudo versus Dillashaw at bantamweight for the belt, and fuck that division, the flyweight division. They'll just ditch it. And then, I suppose, important news in the grand scheme of things, the majority of Mark Hunt's lawsuit against the UFC has been thrown out with a prejudice or whatever it is, where you can't then bring it up or do whatever, appeal it. I forget what it is. I'll have to watch more Shark and then I'll know. But if you want some fun, Google the judge. Because at her approval hearing, this lad Harry Reid got up and waxed lyrical about her, and the next Google result down is judge donates $150,000 to PAC for Harry Reid. Just America being America, but then Britain's not much better, so I don't think it's any better at all, actually. Just the scummy political class and the scummy corporate class getting together and fucking over the little guy, Mark Hunt, again. The only room where Mark Hunt's the little guy. But what a rat fuck bitch. Right, let's get into just this shit show from the weekend. So we'll do a bit of expectation versus reality here. I had very low expectations on Bellator 215. I looked down the card. There's nothing really on it except Mitrione versus Haratonov. Haratonov versus Mitrione should be good because he got an iron-jawed banger against a guy... Well, an iron-jawed banger who doesn't or can't check low kicks against a guy who throws a lot of low kicks but also likes to get into wild trades. So, opportunities for it to go both ways. However, if you look down the rest of that card, there's just fuck all for you. Logan Storley, the super high-level wrestler that they're trying to... One of their high-level wrestlers that they're trying to push into a really good MMA career, takes on a guy who's like 18-10, and they were calling him Logan Snorley because it was a bit of a snoozer. Eduardo Dantes showed some bizarre ringcraft against Toby Misesh, and then the rest of it I could not be asked to follow. But in the main event, last week we said Matt Mitrione Probably best to get to work with those low kicks right away. Very powerful kicker, one of the heavier kickers in the heavyweight division. Worked out very early. I think he was training with Duke Rufus and Pat Barry that he can kick really hard. So he comes out, first kick thrown, smashes Sergey in the cup. They were worried that he'd disintegrated one of his testicles. The fight is immediately turned into a no contest, 15 seconds into round 1, and the news afterwards came out that Sergey had been given a hemorrhoid by this kick. It looked absolutely agonizing. I have so much sympathy for Sergey Haratonov. You can't do much about that, and it happens. If you're trying to time an inside low kick, it will occasionally glide up. But this one was just straight in the cup. And you see a few of these, actually. The few, like, groin kick no contests I can recall have tended to be very early in the fight, often like the first strike thrown, because guys don't have the movement and they're expecting one thing and they don't get it right and they punt the guy square in the cup rather than it just like gliding up or something like that. Shinya Aoki had one. I think Joachim Hansen had one. Vanderlei Silva versus Gilbert Eivel. There's been a few, but they were giving him his time and you were just like, lads, there's no point. There's no point. Just move on. Like when they had Chris Tuchscherer, when he was kicked in the junk full power by Gabriel Gonzaga, another of the hardest kickers the heavyweight division has ever seen, takes a kick square in the dick, almost vomiting. Like they had to bring in a bucket because he was retching. And then they're like, you okay? Cool, walk it off. And then he comes back in and immediately gets head kicked. You're like, at that point, just wave the guy's almost vomiting. Time to wave the fight off. But this one was so clean that you just knew, like the moment he went down, you were going, that's probably a fight ender. Even though, there was a second before it's incredible how your body reacts to this sort of stuff. There's always that little second where some guy goes, oh wait, I think I've been kicked in the dick. Oh no! And then they collapse. I wouldn't accuse Sergey of faking that or playing up the injury anyway. It just is weird that you can like take one and then go, uh-oh. Uh-oh, I'm about to be in the most severe pain. So that was an absolutely rocking start to the weekend. That was supposed to be like the warm-up to Bellator 216, finishing with a lovely, strong heavyweight banger in the main event. As I said at the time, Bellator heavyweight division, the hits keep coming. Like, there's never been anything good happen in this division. And it was just a sign of the things to come at Bellator 216, which happened the next night. So this was Saturday. This was in Connecticut, Uncasville. And you'll remember me making a bigger deal out of that more than anything because I was pissed off that the biggest fight or the biggest rivalry or whatever in British MMA at the moment is happening in Connecticut for no reason. Well, apparently it's to do with who, DAZN owns the tournament, so they wanted it in Connecticut or whatever. Regardless, I'm not that fussed now. About midway through watching the main event, I was like, nah, don't worry, lads, you can keep it. I won't hold this one against the Cokes. So what happened? Eric Silva had a predictable loss against Amasov. Didn't actually get blown out as badly as I expected, but then he's probably not as severely tested in Bellator. They came out this week and they were like, oh yeah, 6 of our fighters have been randomly tested. And you're like, I don't believe you. There's no reason that they would need to be. You don't have to prove it. But then that's the thing about random testing. You either team up with an organisation like USADA or some WADA accredited lab and they publish the results and people, that's the way you get people to respect it. But equally, the only way that happens is if you pay for the testing, and then there's a financial relationship there, and you get into the John Jones USADA stuff, and the same reason we don't trust USADA. However, the whole thing is sort of a catch-22, because I can't have people going, yeah, well, there's no need for Bellator to test, because who trusts USADA? It's totally fine for Mirko Cro Cop to turn up at 46 years old, looking like an absolute tank, because USADA lied about John Jones. Allegedly. Have to throw that in. What else? Okay, so cool. We're moving into the co-main event. Well, not main event. Main cardy stuff now. Because if you've ever watched a Bellator undercard, people were everyone was disappointed by these Bellator events. But in the fight thread on Reddit, there were still people going, hey, there were loads of finishes on the prelims. And you're like, the level of Bellator prelims is so poor. That I'm not going to watch them. That's just how I've been for the last while since I watched a Bellator prelim. But, you know, when you get to the main card, you get into fairly notable fighters, so you'd expect them to do well, or, you know, put on an actual show. But unfortunately, they don't. Bellator does best when it's not trying to be serious. When I start to believe the number 2 promotion coming up as a real contender to the UFC, that's when I tune in and I'm sorely disappointed by Paul Daly wrestling meat. But Cheick Kongo versus Vitaly Milonov, this one was supposed to have wider implications for the division as a whole. Cheick Kongo on a little bit of a career resurgence by merit of fighting rubbish fighters and knocking them out. Vitaly Milonov, the guy. He was the next Fedor. He was the one we were actually excited. I unapologetically was excited for him. I just kept holding off and going, I'll just wait until I've seen him fight someone who's not a complete bum, and then I'll get on the hype train completely. But he disappeared to Russia because he was Bellator heavyweight champion and they have contract disputes all the time. So he disappeared to Russia, did the Nikki Krylov, and just fought like nobody's. Antonio Bigfoot Silva they dragged out to get his ass kicked. And then now he's returned, having sorted out his contract issues or whatever, and he just looked woeful. I mean, Cheick Kongo is a passable striker on the feet. You know, even as a kickboxer, his game was kicking and clinch work. He really was not a good boxer. But he might as well have been Muhammad Imad Bruce Lee in this fight, because he started to circle and Milonov just had no answers. He's throwing this right-hand lead, and it's not like Roy Jones square up a little bit, snap off the right-hand lead. It's not like Fedor Emelianenko just be super quick and land the straight. It's just this awful swing. He just throws his right overhand, swings his head forward, heavy on the front foot, and then he can't follow up. So as soon as Kongo starts circling away from that right hand, every time they come close to the fence, and Kongo's not great at staying off the fence, every time they come close to the fence, Milonov throws the right hand, throws himself off balance, ends up slightly to the right of Kongo, or, you know, Kongo's to Milonov's left, and he can't follow up with like a left hook. He's just looking at him. It's really weird and bad. And yeah, it was really disappointing. And then when he finally did get Kongo down, he was in half guard, clearly too gassed to pass, and he just starts working on a Nogi Ezekiel, which, unless you're Alexei Olenek, has never worked. It's just dreadful. To Kongo's credit, he actually looked fairly decent here. I've been so skeptical on his career resurgence. I've just been like, you know, he's fighting nobodies. But he was circling well. He was circling off to his right side and then throwing in the low kick. He pounded in like 4 in a row in the second round. The second round was Milonov's worst. He just didn't do anything except the right hand lead and failed every time. I keep saying right hand lead. Think swing with no setup rather than right hand lead. And when he did get close enough to Kongo, on the rare occasion he threw like a left hook or something, Kongo would duck in on his hips, get the clinch, turn him onto the fence, and then knee him in the groin, because that's what Cheick Kongo does. Oh, best moment of the weekend, Cheick Kongo knees Milonov in the groin within a minute and a half of the fight starting. Milonov is recovering. They show through the fence Sergei Haratanov laughing and giving the thumbs up, presumably sitting on like a big bag of ice or something. So that was a rough one. I mean, I did a ton of diagrams and shit. Go check the fight primer for my newest article. It was hard work making chicken salad out of this chicken shit weekend, but I did. So go check that out. There's some stuff on the daily MVP fight and everything else that happened this weekend. Just a few themes I picked up on. But let's move on. And well, there was Cro Cop versus Roy Nelson, which I really was almost falling asleep through. I watched it, but I can barely remember that I watched it, to be honest. Roy Nelson without the right hand and without the aggression is just depressing to watch. He doesn't have anything. And people were always like, well, he doesn't even use his ground game, and it's amazing. And then it wasn't. Like, when he did start going to his ground, or trying to go to his ground game, turned out it just wasn't up to the task. He doesn't have the takedowns to take down heavyweights. Because he's probably not even a real heavyweight if he loses the belly. And of course, Cro Cop has always been hard to take down. The first fight, Cro Cop was just running from that right hand and running onto it because he circles left the entire time. And Nelson was just willing to throw it for however long the fight went, and then finally knocked him down. This time he's trying desperately to take Cro Cop down, and Cro Cop has never been an easy man to take down. Unless you're Fedor Emelianenko, and you're chaining takedowns, and you're blasting him in the body in between to make sure he's good and tired for him. So another sort of hollow win on the Mirko Cro Cop revenge tour, but some people love that shit. So I'm glad they got what they wanted. Just sort of sums up the Bellator ethos, really, or what Bellator is. It's kind of like a monkey's paw. I would like to see Mirko Cro Cop win some fights. Oh, here he is against Roy Nelson in the most boring fight you've seen. In the last 10 minutes, because the Cheick Kongo one was just before that. I want to see a heavyweight tournament. Here's 4 heavyweights, 3 light heavyweights and 1 middleweight. Can we have MVP versus Daly at last? Sure you can, Connecticut farmer. So then finally, MVP versus Daly. Oh my goodness. I think I said last week. Yeah, I definitely said last week. I thought Daly would have trouble with the distance. I always thought the striking was going to make him struggle. I thought he could end up looking bad. But I didn't anticipate him being almost super reluctant to throw. He didn't throw anything from the feet for most of the fight. Presumably because he was worried about counters. You know, he was just naked wrestling. And to be taken down by Paul Daly with no setups is, you know, I could forgive you the first time for being surprised. But to have that happen over and over again is pretty damning, I'd say. Now, in fairness, let's talk. What happened on the feet was good from Michael Page. If you notice at the start of every round, he immediately feints Daly onto the fence. But then he's in this weird position where, unlike, say, a Conor McGregor, he's not attacking the guy along the fence and then springing back to the counter. He's waiting for the counter and really reluctant to attack. He threw a couple of long jabs and a jumping kick at one point and a jumping knee at the end of the round at one point. But he really didn't want to step in and do anything. He wanted Daly to swing back at him. So the entire first round was Daly on the fence and MVP feinting and nothing happening. When I was coming up and reading about old boxers of old and things like that, there was always this talk of the mythical round that Willie Pep won without throwing a punch. Famously, he said to various people in the press, watch for the third round. And sometimes he specifically says, I'm going to win it without throwing a punch. Sometimes he just says, watch for the third round. And he feints and he moves and he does such a wonderful job of looking like he's punching and keeping the opponent on defense even when they're throwing actual punches, that he wins the round on 2 of the 3 cards. And that's an incredible achievement. And then I see Michael Venom Page win this first round against Paul Daly without throwing a punch, and I think, oh, actually, it's kind of shit, isn't it? Neither of them did anything, but Michael Page was, I suppose, going forward, but once you hit the fence, there's not really any more going forward, so Paul Daly's just circling, and Page is circling on a slightly tighter circumference. Just dreadful. And then in the second round, Daly finally goes for the legs. Really, long, low shot trying to pick up a leg. And that gets Page backing up. And then that, he gets away from that. But then suddenly he's on the fence, and when Paul Daly shoots again, he gets him down. And then all the time that Page is on the fence, that's the stuff that I was looking at going, oh, if a smart fighter sees that's going to be a problem for you. Because Daly gets him to the fence, feints a few times, never throws anything real, by the way, just completely refusing to throw. Feints, and as soon as he feints, Page will either throw the big right uppercut, or he'll jump for a flying knee. And he did it a dozen times in this fight. Jumped, hopped, and went, oh, no, it wasn't a real punch, and then lands. And that, that's when Paul Daly should have been swinging like crazy at him, because he's got both feet off the floor for a second. You've got every advantage to move in. But Daly seemed, petrified to actually throw his hands. Last week I was saying, get a hold of him, push him to the fence, and then use the wrestling to break free and throw his hands. And he did that a couple of points. He had Page sat along the fence, and he just stood up and started swinging. And that was good. That was when he landed his few good punches. But most of the fight was, like someone said, people said it was like white belts grappling. I'll one-up you. It was Englishman wrestling. We don't have that shit over here. And it really showed. And to be fair, Paul Daly has gone a whole career of doing surprisingly decently stopping takedowns from a lot of people. It's only the top wrestlers who really mug him. It's only the top wrestlers who really make him look bad. And he occasionally does weird shit like rolls through on an omoplata from a shot. But yeah, Daly has never been a man to go to his offensive takedowns. And I talked a lot about the distance management in my article, again, fightprimer.com. Going to keep plugging it. The difference between Page and James Vick, who we'll talk about now, is that they were both backing up, but Page put himself in a position where he had 20, 25 feet to back up before he really needed to worry about getting offline. Whereas Vick is moving around the cage and just backing up as soon as the opponent throws. So whether he hits the fence or not just depends on basically luck where he starts in the ring when the opponent starts punching. I keep saying ring, cage, you know what I mean. But with, 25 feet of space to move straight back into, not only does that take away the danger of like backing up on a straight line, which is normally that you hit a fence or a ropes, but it just means that you can use that as an answer to everything. And if you've got Daly was throwing low kicks occasionally, throws a low kick, Page just backs off. Then Daly's out of position because he's thrown a hard low kick and he's got his legs across himself and he's got to get back to his stance. And we were saying Paul Daly doesn't really low kick enough, but in this fight he was just throwing him naked, and it's not going to work against a guy who's just waiting to back up. He and Paul Felder could both have done with a double jab, because when you're dealing with someone who's just going to back up, you've got to eat up that space. You can't just wait until they're near the fence, because if they're good, they're not going to put themselves near the fence or near enough the fence that one attack will get them to the fence. You've got to make it happen over and over again, and the way to do that is to double jab or to pick up the lead leg and glide in behind it and then jab. It's those combinations of feints or non-committal strikes that give the opponent very little to grab onto. If you double jab well with your chin down and you're in position and you're throwing the jabs out just like those are going out there, but really I'm thinking about moving forward and making sure that I'm hard to hit. The jabs don't really matter. If they hit the opponent in the eye because he doesn't move, great. But otherwise you're really just trying to make distance or draw reactions. Like Vic was leaning back an awful lot. That's another difference between MVP and Vic. MVP very side on, ducks down in one direction into his stance. Vic more square on, still quite side on for a kickboxer, but more square on, and he'll pull his head straight back. And if you get feinted into that, and the opponent ends up close enough that they can extend that right hand through where you're leaning, that's disastrous. That's the worst possible place to get hit. Well, you want a really exaggerated example of getting hit while leaning back. Obviously, Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman. No one's really going to lean back that far unless they're being an idiot. But, if you get caught leaning back like that, you got nothing to catch you. Your head's behind your center of gravity. You get hit. You're not going to get a foot there in time. So the double jab to the right hand would have been wonderful to see from Felder, or the jab to the inside low kick to make distance and pin Vic down. There was a lot of just sort of ineffective striking out of range, just where he was chasing him, throwing overhands and left hooks. When he did catch him near the fence, and it was more by like process of attrition than masterful ring craft. When he did catch him by the fence, he was able to catch him leaning a couple of times, and then he did what we was talking about, which was use the clinch fight and get him to the clinch and then break free with combinations. Low kick hard if you get the chance. His low kicks again, Vic was able to back up from a lot of them and come back with counters. Vic's one response to everything seems to be to back up or lean straight back, and that's quite worrying. He does a lot of that jab, lean straight back, and if you're a big tall guy, you can put that back foot way out behind you. Think of the famous photo of Muhammad Ali leaning all the way back as Joe Frazier leaps towards him with a left hook, and it's just falling short. If you put that right foot far back, or the rear foot far back, that governs where your head can go. You can't really pull back effectively if your head's going back past both your feet. Again, Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman example. But then he was able to come back with the right hand and so on. So Vic looked fairly decent. He was looking for a lot of snap downs anytime he could. That's the thing about being tall. Felder would get him in a clinch and he'd just try and put his elbow past Felder's head and crank him down into a guillotine position. Very, very good guillotines, Vic. When they were doing that advertising campaign for the Vic Gaethje fight, they said 18 combined KOs. And you're like, oh, wait. Justin Gaethje has 15 KOs. So it was actually just 3 KOs for Michael Vick, and then a lot of finishes by guillotine and things like that too. He's quite a rounded guy in terms of finishing ability. But if he'd won this, I would have said, you want an easy fight for Conor McGregor? James Vick. Because, they're going to give him Donald Cerrone, or, which is a fairly easy fight for him in stylistically, it seems. He could well lose that, but those two are long, lanky guys who have real trouble with guys shooting up the middle. Both of them can be pushed onto the fence and have trouble there. But Vic more so. He doesn't have the intercepting knee or the front kicks or things like that. Donald Cerrone has a lot of weapons, nice elbows coming in. Actually, Vic throws the occasional good elbow. But, Vic has less tricks to hide his long-established weaknesses, whereas Cerrone is an old hand. He knows what he's bad at, and he has some things to cover for it. But good to see Paul Felder sneak into the top 10 with this one. Obviously, the rankings are a joke. Someone was asking me, Jack, how do you feel about Robert Whittaker being the lowest ranked champion pound for pound? And I was just like, people don't know shit. It's 14 dudes voting, and they don't know anything. Like, if you can look at, Rose Namajunas, Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko, and say that they are more skilled, pound for pound, whatever, than Robert Whittaker, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you don't know what you're watching. But that's if it's a measure of skill. If it's a measure of accomplishment, he beat Yoel Romero twice, which is like more than almost anyone else can do. But again, we're into Robert Whittaker being underappreciated rant here, and I was actually just talking about whatever I was talking about, Vic versus Felder. So Felder gets into the rankings, which is nice. He's an absolute workhorse. He fights like 3 times a year, like clockwork, and he's always interesting. I mean, we should touch on the main event, because like all my build-up stuff was around the main event and how exciting it was, and then it went off like a wet fart. Went off like a fart in church. Ngannou landed the counter uppercut, as we said. He does like 3 things, and Cain Velasquez came out with a game plan that played into those 3 things. It was just dreadful. Did the head wobble, and it looked worse than ever. Back in the day, I said this last week, back in the day, people were like, look at that head movement. This guy's like a Mexican Tyson. But, yeah, just looked dreadful. Step-up kicks missed by miles. Head kick. What did I say last week? I was like, throws a lot of head kicks. I don't know why. Just throws up a head kick, almost puts himself out of position to get hammered by the biggest puncher in possibly the sport. God, how good would it be to get Rumble Johnson back? Because he said that he'd only take a heavyweight fight now. He's actually bodybuilding full-time, and he's enormous now. If you've not seen him, he's a thick boy. But how good would that fight be for the first round? If it went any distance at all, it'd be shit. So he comes out, gets hit with an uppercut, puts his foot down weird, crumples his knee. We're getting a chicken egg situation here where people want to say it's just the knee or people are going to say it's just the uppercut. Doesn't matter, because he came in with a terrible game plan. Who immediately dives in face first after Ngannou. I'm just going to put my head about hip height here, having shown no feints. I feel bad for him because he blew out his knee, but that was a really bad game plan to come in with. This guy's supposed to be well-rounded. This guy's supposed to be the best-rounded heavyweight in the world. We're repeatedly told. But, again, it was just like, anytime the 1-2 dive in isn't going to work, he has no answers. But don't worry, in like a year and a half, they'll put him in with whoever the Travis Brown equivalent is now. Derek Lewis. Put him with Derek Lewis and he'll smash Derek Lewis and it'll be easy. And then we'll be like, oh my god, he's healthy now. And then he'll be out for another year. What else happened? Cynthia Cavallo caught Casey. Vaguely remember that was good. Oh, Kron Gracie versus Alex Caceres. Someone was upset that I said Hicks and Gracie never fought anyone good, except Masa Funaki, which is true. Kron and Hickson now share the distinction of their best fight coming against someone who's under 155 pounds. It's just that Kron Gracie is himself also under 155 pounds. The Hicks and Gracie myth, like, if you believe it, it's just ludicrous. The other thing is that like, people go, well, he was 40 years old when Huis and people challenged him, and you're like, well, he was still taking fights, and he took his best opponent in his last fight, Masa Funaki. 2 weeks after he was asked to compete in the Pride 2000 Grand Prix against the actual best fighters in the world. But Kron, he's legit. I was actually going back through some of the old ADCC footage, because Kron fought, I said fought, don't get butthurt that I said fought. Kron fought and lost to Marcelo in ADCC twice. And of course, Marcelo is under 77 kilos god. And they happened to meet twice. And that's how Kron went out of his weight category both years. And then the year that Marcelo stopped going, Kron won the gold medal. And in the course of those ones that he didn't win, he submitted guys like Murillo Santana, still top of the heap. Claudio Calasan, still top of the heap. Really good guys he submitted with like his famous guillotine, which we've still not seen much in MMA, to be honest. But that just shows you, like, if you could go out in the first round to the guy who eventually wins the thing and no one really knows how good you are, it could have been like a silver medalist in either of those if he got to the final with Marcelo. Those Marcelo matches are really good. He spends a lot of time trying to poke Marcelo in the eye in the first one, which was weird. But I think the first one is when Marcelo said that like he got out there and the mats were so slick that he was like, I'm not going to wrestle, I'm just going to sit down. But Marcelo, like, on the subject, well, actually, we've got a question about leg locks later, so I'll talk about that then. But yeah, Kron versus Alex Caceres. Caceres, 25 men have tried to beat him and only 12 have. He's just, like, there's no need for him to be in the UFC. I've never seen an Alex... The only time I was impressed by an Alex Caceres fight was when him and Rodriguez threw spinning shit at each other for 25 minutes at altitude in Mexico City. Or Denver, I can't remember which it was. But it was one of those ones where everyone gasses, and then they went out there for 25 minutes and just spun at each other. And the fight itself was pretty bad, but I was impressed by the gas tank to do that. Nice standing back take from the body lock, gets the body lock behind him, puts in like the broomstick, you know, where you're straightening the leg behind the crook of the opponent's other knee, but then sort of just pulls him down, gets on the back. Easy submission win for Kron. And people were like, oh my god, he used the Gracie front kick. Yeah, he did. God, that was bad. But he's actually got okay hands, Kron Gracie. When you see him in Japan, especially from like the single collar tie, if he could put some decent dirty boxing together along the fence, that'd be really interesting to see. And then who else impressed me? Andre Fili was good. Oh my goodness, I've not actually caught up on Jimmy Rivera versus Aljamain Sterling. I forgot that was on this card altogether. But yeah, Andre Fili impressed me with his jab. I wrote about this, you know, go read the article, but the one thing that I would say is if you wanted to push him to like get a finish in that fight, the thing was he was showing the jab, he realized Jury was reaching for the jab with his right hand, and then he was trying to hook off the jab, but he was sort of staying at the same range, so it was like a slappy hook, and then he'd throw the right kick off it. If he really wanted to, like, you know, push for a chance to hurt his man, he'd, you know, feint the jab, use the shoulder feint to step in deep, and then come with the left hook, because Jury's right hand was out reaching, like he was really overcompensating because the jab was giving him so much trouble, but his head was quite a ways back behind it. You know, he was slapping distance rather than hooking distance. But no, really, really appreciated Andre Fili's performance here. I thought it was really good. And Jury, in the couple of moments that he had, it was like, wow, fair enough. You almost won the fight there. That was quite impressive. The back fist along the fence into the left straight, catching him circling, that was lovely. And then Vicente Luque and Brian Barberena had an absolute banger. Luke's a guy who a lot of us have had like our eyes on as a prospect. If you hear anyone talking about prospects in the sport, normally Vicente Luque comes up. But Brian Barberena is just tough as nails, and ever since that Sage Northcutt fight, you know, he's the spoiler. He comes in and ruins your prospect, or your golden boy. But yeah, just got blasted in the face very early on, while throwing Anderson Silva inside-out kicks to the lead leg like Saenchai. Like Saenchai does in like sparring footage at seminars. That's the sort of level of kick we're talking about here. But gets blasted in the face, and then he's like, oh, actually, I'm fine. That didn't hurt nearly as much as I thought it would. And proceeds to pour on the pressure. And Vicente Luque really too much putting on the handcuffs, I thought. You know, he could have been moving away, cutting angles, trying to get away from some of this stuff. Instead, he was allowing Barberena to stand on top of him and throw like 3 or 4, 5, 6 strikes in a row. And Barberena really played to it. He wasn't wasting his energy. He was like tap, 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 hook, back fist with the same hand. And then he was pinning the hands to the head and turning over into the elbow, which is what you want to see always from someone when the opponent's covering up. Why break your hand when you can slice the opponent's head open quite easily? Didn't go to the body as much as you wanted to see, but then Vicente Luque did and slowed him down a bit. And then finally got the stoppage very, very late in the last round. What was it? I was going to say 10 seconds to go. 6 seconds to go. Wow. Really good fight. And the best fight of the year candidates for me are ones that are a story, where one guy's doing something and then suddenly it stops working or the other guy makes a change. And then he's doing something and you've got to do something to change that. And that's what it was like. He, you know, came out, blasted him. Suddenly he realized he couldn't put this guy away. The guy starts pouring on the pressure, so he's covering up. Then he brings out the body shots, and then Brian Barberena brings out the elbows. And it escalated nicely. So that was pretty good. But otherwise, bit of a damp squib of a weekend. I've not caught up on Nongo's fight yet. Quite want to see that. Luke Sanders versus Henan Barrera. God, that's a sad one. Oh, and Alexandra Albu lost, which is hilarious, but they'll keep her around because the girl's got an ass like I've never seen. Oh, that last note got away from me. Like a shaved leg and a heel hook. So let's do some questions and then we'll fuck off for the couple of days before we... God, the preview is going to be hard for this one. Well, actually, there's a couple of events on. I don't just have to do Thiago Santos, thank God. Oh my God, Gallagher, James Gallagher. He's fighting, so that'll be fun. Anyway, question time. Hi Jack, firstly thanks for making my hour-and-a-half commutes enjoyable. I have always wondered if the Southpaw Jab is neglected or undeserving of attention that the orthodox jab gets. Do you think the Southpaw Jab against an orthodox opponent is equally useful, slightly less useful, or much less useful of a tool than the orthodox jab against an orthodox opponent? Thanks from G. I think the Southpaw Jab is totally legit. You know, there's great Southpaw jabbers, like Pernell Whitaker was very good with his Southpaw Jab. But, there's things you have to do differently because you're getting that sort of they call it cross swords, but the hands are getting in the way of each other. The angles are slightly different. You know, the whereas your shoulder is nicely sneaking down the middle of the opponent's guard already from a from a orthodox versus orthodox stance or a southpaw versus southpaw, your lead shoulder is suddenly jostling for position with the opponent's lead shoulder in a southpaw versus orthodox matchup. What you'll see guys do at best is it takes some variance. Like, you can, even if the opponent is trying to control your hand, you can, like, snap it down the inside of that arm and knock their arm out a little bit as you jab. You can step to the left or right and jab again, obviously. You could pull back away from the jab and jab. If the opponent's really reaching for your hand, you can pull your hand back a bit, they'll reach for it, and then you can shoot over the top. You know, there's all these little things you can do, so it's not... I would say it's trickier, it's complicated by the hands being in the way of each other a lot of the time, but I wouldn't say that it's useless at all. You know, it's and then there's guys like Manny Pacquiao who just use the jab for volume. For a while, he had like one of the most used and least accurate jabs in boxing, I seem to remember. But he uses it well to set up the combinations. It just hides his steps and things. And he's a volume kind of guy anyway. Cheers, G. Mr. Slack, a wave of techniques renaissance/resurgence has hit through the competitive BJJ scene, brackets Danaher Death Squad, with leg attacks and just better, cleaner technique. In the past few years, BJJ hit a bit of a standstill in MMA, where people understood if they had basic defense, they could punch the stripes and belts off people. Now that the game has progressed, and people like Ryan Hall, Gary Tonnen, and soon Gordon Ryan are rattling off dominant wins mainly by incredibly high-level BJJ and an intricate understanding of leg locks, do you think BJJ is going to have its second big hit in the martial arts? Brackets, 10th Planet wants to be the new wave, but I got Danaher, close brackets. Part B of this thought is the long-distance striker, brackets particularly kicks, with BJJ to literally fall back on, of Ryan Hall, especially versus Gray Maynard, and to less success, Paul Craig, particularly versus Enrique de Silva, becoming a fight style, almost the polar opposite of the very commonly seen boxing with wrestling. In BJJ, is BJJ making a comeback, and is BJJ/long-distance striking a legitimate combo? And that's from Savage, the Macho Man. Right, leg locks. I was about to say I'm still not sold on them, but no, I'm tentatively waiting to see how leg locks, or leg attacks rather, carry over into the later stages of fights at the highest level. Palhares never tended to do very well later in fights, but that was, partly because he was a roided up monster with no gas tank or striking. So I'm very interested to see if people like Ryan Hall and Gary Tonnen can pick up the same or attack the same things later in a fight once things get sweaty, especially when you've got dudes shaving their legs and shit, or corners dropping a bit of Vaseline on them. But then people get sweaty in competitive jiu-jitsu, so it'll be interesting. In terms of the long-distance striking and BJJ, I think it's always dangerous to get into these things where you're like, I'm going to learn kicking and BJJ, and that'll be my style, because it can go the way of Paul Gray. You can just, as soon as the other guy moves into boxing range, you're like, uh-oh, better shoot a bad takedown. But I think that as a tactic or a strategy works very well. The long distance sort of like artillery of the kicking game, and if you've got a good leg entanglement game to roll through on, if the opponent grabs a hold of one of your legs, it's a nice way of neutralizing that grab the leg and just take top position that would happen a lot of the time. That was the whole reason that people didn't kick above the knee, basically, in the early days of MMA. I say the early days. After we found the value of the low kick, it was a while before people were like, oh my god, high kick. What was it? P.T. Smith versus Mark Coleman, and even after that, people weren't too keen on it until, like, Eve Edwards came along. And Cro Cop. But the whole thing has always been, like, if you kick and the opponent catches it, you are giving up top position. But if you kick and the opponent catches it, they still have to actually run through and finish that takedown. And that's when you can do your weird shit Granbys and roll through into leg attacks, if you're good at that sort of thing. So I think the leg entanglement game has that area is going to be really interesting to see in MMA. You know, you saw it in Gary Tunnan's style of jiu-jitsu. He'll, like, present the lead leg to the opponent when they're on their knees. He'll stand up from guard and, like, give them the lead leg, and then he'll try and do, like, what's called a victor roll to get on leg, or a victory roll occasionally. Not so much Gordon Ryan. He's very much more about elevating people with butterfly hooks and so on. But I think, you know, if someone has caught a leg while you're kicking, I think rolling through on their leg, you know, their best answer is to try and slip free. It's not to try and turn back into you and take top position a lot of the time. They're probably just going to move away or try and slip out in the moment. So I think in that sense, it doesn't really matter if you can finish the leg lock if someone's, you know, say you're sweaty and late in the fight. I think it works well as a deterrent, or even as like a lifeline in that having had a kick caught situation. And of course, the other thing is that most leg attack entries in high-level jiu-jitsu in recent years have come from the bottom man. And this is something that Danaher talks about on his DVD, and I think Gordon Ryan's touched on it too. But, like, if you're on your back, you've got four limbs to play with, and the opponent will often... The whole thing that has happened over recent years is that, well, you know, when you start BJJ, you very quickly realise people can't triangle me if I'm standing up and they're on the mat. So pass on your feet. Whereas that sort of presents you to attacking the leg, to being attacked at the legs. But, you know, the butt scoot doesn't really happen in MMA very much. And if it does, the opponent will back up and maybe throw in a Superman punch or just ask for you to stand up. Whereas they will be able to catch the leg if you kick at them. So at some point eventually. So that is a way that you could probably roll onto the leg that doesn't really exist as much in jiu-jitsu, and is sort of a MMA specific thing. So I think that's quite interesting. The other thing, of course, is that most people are not good kickers. It takes a lot of practice to get good at kicking. Most people can punch competently if they're training, you know, twice a day, and one of those sessions is boxing. So being more comfortable at that longer range and encouraging the opponent to step in more will also take you into your grappling range more comfortably. When, you know, if you watch someone like, Roger Gracie, someone asked me about his MMA career the other day. If you watch him against King Mo, he can't get, and you know, in some of his other fights too, he can't really get close enough to the opponent. He was like working on his boxing. He threw out a jab, but he's 6'4" or 6'5" or whatever. He's got this long ass jab, and then he's trying to drop in on a shot from that distance. You know, he's got this long distance he's working at, and the opponent's already wary of him, and then he's got to close that distance. Whereas if maybe he had a kicking game and he had something to convince the opponent to pick up their legs or to, like, dull their reactions a bit, that might have worked better. If he had a good right hand, he could tie up off. That might have worked better. You know, the truth is, the more weapons you have, the better, and that's never really going to change. But if you want to take it like a, but if you really want to take it down a simplified alley and only learn a few things, good kicking into slick guard game and rolling leg attacks. Why not? Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm your boy Jack Slack. We'll probably have another one of these coming later in the week because I haven't touched on the previews yet. I do like doing 2 a week. It's working well and it's bringing up the views on the channel, which is probably a good idea. My post-fight breakdown this week was at Fight Primer, so go look at that. If you want to support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send a question to the podcast, now that I'm answering them again, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And Buy Notorious, especially if you're Italian, but hold off because I'm doing rewrites for the Italian version. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Sergey's left nut bless.